I do think that death gets a bad rep. Dead things, things that are somehow associated with the energy of death in some way, like graveyards or bones or death deities, they get associated with this sort of negative, low vibrational thing that you need to remove and put as far away from your life as you can, or else bad things are going to happen. And I think that that equation, that thinking about death and dead things and death deities from that perspective, is the reason why you have so much fear. Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica Crazy. So I wanted to do a video for the kind of like Samhain Halloween season about death, and specifically what the deities that I work with, the death deities that I work with, mostly Hades, have taught me about death, or just like big messages that have come through from them about death. I talked last week about some of the things that I believe as a pagan, and I got a little bit into the afterlife and like talking about not like me describing this is exactly what goes on in the afterlife, but me kind of talking about the idea of fate and Greek eschatology and Hades, and kind of like how, you know, me being a devotee of Hades fits into all of that. So if you're interested in that type of conversation, like something that's more specific around like beliefs associated with death and paganism and working with death deities, then that might be a good video to watch as well. I did a podcast episode a couple months back that was really popular. Like a lot of people downloaded it, a lot of people watched it on YouTube. I was kind of surprised at how popular it was. It was basically about 5 things that the gods have taught me about deity work. This episode is kind of like this Halloween version. It's like the memento mori version, what the gods have taught me about death. I just launched my Patreon and I've been posting a lot about this topic. So if this intrigues you, or if you also work with death deities, then I think you would really love all the Patreon content that's coming out this month. I have posted a couple different like article blog posts about death. We talked about Venus and Scorpio. So join me over on Patreon for even more content around this topic. Let's hop into the 5 things that the Chthonic gods have taught me about death. The first thing has been a lesson that has come up so many times. And I think that this one comes up a lot when I'm feeling fearful, when I'm feeling like I am really nervous about something ending or coming to a close, when I feel like change is coming, but for whatever reason, that change shouldn't happen. I don't know if anybody else has ever felt this way, I'm sure, but sometimes I feel like guilty about changing. Sometimes I feel like, oh, why did I change my mind on that? Or why am I changing as a person? And sometimes I think about it from 2 perspectives. I think like, I should have changed sooner, or why did this take so long? I think that that's something that comes up a lot. Like, why am I doing this now? Why couldn't I have always been like this? It's not how wisdom and learning works, but okay, Angelica. And then the other thing is like, are people going to be upset that I changed? Or am I going to be kind of upset that I changed? Am I going to upset people in some way, whether it's other people or myself, through this change, through this shift, right? Can you tell them I'm Mars and Libra? I'm like, what does everyone else think of me? I work with the deity Zagreus in addition to Hades and Persephone. Zagreus is considered like the precursor to Dionysus. So he's like this proto Dionysus that the Orphics used to worship or work with. There's a lot of interesting stuff around Zagreus, what his roles are, what he's the god of. It's very interesting. There's also kind of some contention around like who his father was. Was it Zeus? Was it Hades? I would say the general consensus is that it's Zeus. However, I feel a very chthonic energy from Zagreus, and partly because he is Persephone's child and he was born in the underworld, and he does like have a chthonic quality. He is a chthonic god, but I think that that is kind of proof in a way that maybe Hades had something to do with this. And this is a whole different topic of me arguing the fact that maybe Zagreus is Hades' child. But regardless of that, Zagreus is a really fascinating deity that talks a lot about this idea of transmutation and morphing into something else, and this idea that like matter cannot be destroyed, it can only be transferred. So essentially what happened with him is he was born and he is the god of light. He represents this kind of like heightened consciousness. He represents almost like a new genre of deities. In the Greek myths, right, there's the Titan deities, there's the Olympians, there's kind of these like lesser gods that don't necessarily like have a they don't really have like a generation, you know? They're like not Olympians, but they're kind of the Olympian era, like, you know, Persephone and other deities. But Zagreus represents this whole new generation of deities that is more like attuned with what humans need and more attuned just with the nature of humans in general, teaching humans, being really involved in humans' life, even more than the Olympians were or are. He represents light and enlightenment. He is also this very earthy deity. And there's this really interesting idea that comes from Camille Paglia, who's, you know, kind of like a gender philosopher and among other things. But Camille Paglia talks about how there is the wisdom of the body, the wisdom of kind of like the primal nature of humans or mortals, and she calls it the wisdom of Dionysus. And then there is Apollo, who is all about kind of like enlightenment and forward progression and that sort of thing. Or like you could think, she equates it with Apollo. You could think of it as just sort of more academic, more intellectual focused wisdom. And so that's the Apollonian wisdom, and then we have the Dionysus wisdom. Zagreus is kind of a mix of both. He's able to link a lot of intellectual things with the wisdom of the body. He is sort of like associated with Taurus, and he has horns like a bull. He's often considered to be this blessed god or this divine child of Persephone that is here to free humans from this cycle of death and rebirth and helps humans kind of be ushered into the fields of Elysium or the Blessed Isles and kind of help them fulfill their fate in that way. The Titan gods really don't like Zagreus because he represents this new thing that they're unfamiliar with. He also represents this closeness of the gods and mortals that the Titans really dislike and don't want to be any part of. Because of these reasons and more, they tear him apart, they kill him, mostly like Kronos and Typhon, but they come and they, they tear him apart and they kill him. They try to kill him, I should say. The only thing that's left is his heart. And his heart ends up being transferred into Dionysus. And Dionysus, the god now, the Olympian god now, has the heart of Zagreus within him. Basically, the precursor to him that represented this whole new form of gods was just too much, too soon, too powerful. The Titans were not interested in him. So he was transferred into something maybe a little bit more palatable, maybe a little bit different, right? I even, say like Zagreus takes some of the Dionysian wisdom and mixes it with the other types of wisdom that there are out there. And so even in that fact, right, Dionysus is very different than Zagreus. He holds different qualities. He represents different things. It's not this like super equal exchange of, his entire personality became transferred into this other person, but the heart, what was at his core, the will of his immortal soul essentially was transferred into Dionysus and he became Dionysus. His energy was changed, transferred, and became something else, right? Matter cannot be destroyed. It can just change and be transmuted. And Zagreus in his myth teaches us that. This is a lesson that I get from the chthonic gods constantly. Either I'm reminded of Zagreus through Hades or Persephone, either I just, call upon him as a chthonic god and I feel that message, or just even from working with other chthonic deities or in other situations that aren't like Zagreus specific. That's just this message that I get over and over again. There are things in your life that need to change, need to shift, maybe relationships, maybe a bunch of things, right? Like I could name so many things that could need changing or need shifting. And we need to remember that these things are being transferred into other things. I think sometimes we're like, I hope that I'll close the door and another will open. Like, I just hope so. I don't think it will. I feel like that's too good to be true. But we have to remember that that's kind of how things work, right? They could not kill Zagreus. They could, destroy him in a way, but he lives on in Dionysus. And it's different and it's not the same and it's a different vibe, right? But that's kind of the magic, you know what I mean? And Dionysus is a very successful god, he's killing it. He's doing a great job. So I think sometimes that I need that reminder that literally it is kind of this natural law that when things end, new things open, because there's this transfer of matter. And I think a fear of mine is that like a bunch of things are going to leave my life and my life is going to like have this absence of those things, right? And that's not really how things work either, right? I'm sure like you've experienced or you could experience in the future something similar to that, right? But I would still argue that there are things being transferred into other things, right? Like you still have the same 24 hours in the day every day, even if it's a wildly different 24 hours. So there are always going to be things that are added to your life. There's always going to be things that you pick up on or you choose to do or you learn about. And, there's always change that is coming in the future. So I think sometimes it helps to kind of quell this like fear, whether it be rational or irrational, around my life changing so much in a way that I don't want it to, or in a way that would cause this major gap in my life. And again, like that's not really possible. It's possible things could really change and it could be upsetting. And we'll talk about that in a second. But there are always going to be things that are created out of that. And sometimes it's really spooky. Like sometimes you really do feel like, oh, this person passes away or this relationship ends and this brand new one begins or this child is born, right? Like we can see this as patterns in our life. And so I think it's really helpful to remind ourselves to tap into that. The second thing is it kind of goes along with the last idea, but it might be a different perspective. Death and things ending in your life, right? Death energy, that kind of vibe, right? Death card energy. It's not supposed to feel super clarifying all the time. It's not supposed to be like, wow, I have no questions. I have no notes. This makes perfect sense. I completely understand why this had to happen or this situation had to end or whatever. Sometimes we can get clarity through things ending, definitely. Sometimes we can feel peace. And I even encourage that, right? To see the peace in these moments where you're losing things or you're having to say goodbye to things, right? There is peace there. But it's not always supposed to feel super clarifying, right? And I use the word clarifying because I kind of mean like it's not supposed to feel like you're not supposed to understand everything about it. I think that sometimes when things end in our lives, right? Like we have to let go of a relationship or we have to quit a job or something, we wait till we get the clarity around that. But sometimes like that clarity really never comes, but we are given an opportunity to either say, yes, I'm going to end this thing, or kind of move on and not, right? Or whatever it is. Sometimes we don't get to make that choice and it just ends up happening. But it's not often this thing where we just feel so sure and so clear and so excited to let this thing go. There's usually this kind of like mist around it or this veil that shrouds us from knowing what the right decision is, right? And this is literally the nature of death. The underworld is not here. It is elsewhere. It is somewhere else. The veil, like literally when I just say the veil between things and there be a veil over something, there's something about it that is inherently kind of confusing or kind of hazy. And that's sort of how we're meant to experience that other side most of the time. So don't expect moments of things ending in your life to automatically feel super clarifying and like, wow, that makes total sense. It's supposed to be weird and confusing and strange how that happened and not quite clear as to why or what's around it. Sometimes we never get those answers, right? Sometimes we literally, for the rest of our lives, go, I have no idea why this happened. And I guess the work is just sitting with that and sitting with those emotions. I think that when, like, let's say somebody literally dies or passes away, right? We have an easier time understanding like the confusion and sadness and anger and the veil that is kind of over that situation, especially if it's something that, you know, feels really sudden or doesn't make any sense. It very much has that energy of like, this thing happened, but I don't know why, and I don't know what it means, and I don't know how I'm supposed to move forward. And that can also happen when things end in your life that are, you know, maybe a little bit smaller scale, or you have to let things go, or you keep waiting for this clarity around an ending and it's not coming. Think about it like a death that you've experienced, or just the idea of death in general. Think about it. It's not supposed to feel super clarifying, especially when you're in the moment. Maybe a couple of years later, a couple of months later, you can start to kind of understand it. You can start to work through those emotions and sit with that. I think it's just all about sitting with that and recognizing in advance, like, it's okay if I don't have the answers. I'm not necessarily supposed to know everything, and I'm just supposed to navigate the situation however I feel like it should be navigated. The next thing that the Chthonic gods have taught me is that things are not that serious. Things are really not as serious as we make them out to be all the time, right? And what I mean by this is I used to think about the world really seriously. I'm a Capricorn, right? I feel like I was born thinking about things really seriously. Like, I literally, the second I was alive, I was like trying to take the world really seriously. As a child, I was very like, I was kind of like that old soul vibe, a little parentified. There was, you know, there was some things there, right? But I always like looked at the world really seriously. I remember being like 11 and I was like, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I want to be a writer, which I still want to be a writer to this day. So I wasn't wrong when I was 11, but it was still just interesting that I kind of had it all figured out by then. But I was like, I want to be a writer. I want to go to school for English and creative writing, which I didn't end up doing. I didn't really know anything about the occult at that time, so that wasn't a part of it yet, but you know, now it is. But I just had this like plan of like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I want to do. This, like, I can't wait till I'm 18 so I can start doing these things. And even before then, I was like really interested in writing, and I would try to write as much as I could to practice, and I just took things really, really seriously. And I think part of that was because I was still like under this umbrella of control of my parents and just the, you know, as a minor, there were so many things, right? And I really felt like things were out of my control. And so I almost like needed to step into that really serious role and think of the world in this really like serious kind of, you know, like chronological way. And then as I started to actually become an adult, attain some type of autonomy, I started to realize that I could kind of decide what I wanted to do on a daily basis. I can decide how I want to spend my off time, you know, by virtue of maybe having a lot of say in what I want to choose for a career or how I want my career to eventually develop. I can start to choose what my days in general look like. So not just my off time, but all of my time. I can decide what kind of relationships I want to be in. I can decide what kind of friends I want to have, right? And you know, obviously I know that some of these things just come into my life and I'm not specifically deciding them, but now I realize that I do get to make a lot of decisions on a day-to-day basis that are just for me, or that I sort of, as an adult with autonomy. I get to decide to do these things. And so I started to realize that the seriousness to which I held everything and every decision in my life and every micro decision, like every moment of the day, I used to be like, oh my gosh, I have to use this wisely or else, you know? And I started to just be like, okay, like it's a good idea to like manage my time wisely and do all those things, but I shouldn't hold it to this extreme to where I'm not having fun, to where I'm not enjoying myself, to where I'm looking at life at this like system and this chronological like formula instead of this beautiful unfolding of fate and my desires and manifestations and all of these things, right? I was not thinking about it from that more magical, more free perspective. I was sort of thinking it from this really like Saturnian perspective of time, which makes sense, right? I'm a Capricorn, and I think that's how we approach the world, especially like in a kind of a capitalist world, right? We just start to approach it from this perspective of I need to use every hour, and I can't have fun, and I can't choose what I need to do. I just need to, go by duty, or I need to get into this industry or do that, right? We are kind of like encouraged to think that way. I think reminding myself that things are not as serious as I once thought they were helps me keep things lighter. It helps me have a little bit more like leniency, forgiveness of myself. I tend to be really hard on myself. And it helps me like not just freak out or have like really bad anxiety in moments where I do feel like things are really overwhelming. So I see it both as something that I've learned about me and my paradigm, and maybe you and yours, and also something that has been really helpful as a piece of advice. And I think the more that I see it and kind of like see how it's true in my life, the more that when I say that to myself, things are not that serious, I have all this evidence to kind of back that up. The next thing that the Chthonic gods have taught me is that a lot of people are reacting from a place of their past self or their younger self, or just some type of version of themselves and how they were raised, how they came to be who they are. Everybody has their own things that they have to work on. Everybody has their own natal chart and fate. Some people are really ill-equipped for certain things. Some people just never kind of figured out how to manage emotions in certain ways, right? Some people never go to therapy, whatever. I used to think that people who were older than me, or like family members or parents, or even people that I really look up to, and people that both professionally and personally I seek to be like. Everybody is kind of operating from this perspective of the past and how they manage things that are coming up through their personalities. I know that this is not really a groundbreaking idea, but it's something that's really helped me to understand conflicts that I've had with other people, or situations that just didn't work out, relationships that have had to end, or how to keep up and heal current relationships that I'm having with certain people in my life, right? How to, be around people who maybe aren't treating me wonderfully 100% of the time, or how to navigate situations of conflict in family, in personal life, from kind of this more mature perspective. And this has been something that as I grow up and as I get older, it really is a huge message for me. I used to just think that everybody was doing the work that I do to understand myself, or to heal, or to like understand how I process things emotionally. Another thing that I do with the death deities is that I am constantly like asking them for feedback, constantly. I don't like, I guess it is shadow work. I don't want to say that I don't do shadow work, but I don't really like think of it as shadow work necessarily. I think of it more as just like me talking about myself with the deities, asking them for help, asking them to shift my perspective, or when I have certain things that come up in my life that I need to like actively work on in that moment, like a conflict or how I reacted to something, or me just reflecting on something that I did that I didn't really like. In those moments, or as I get those reflections, I will do that work with my deities in that moment to help me to process and learn from those things. So instead of doing like set shadow work of like, today I'm doing shadow work, I feel like I'm just kind of always doing it. And when I notice that there's something that I reacted poorly to, or I did not like that I did, or whatever it is, like I said, that's something that I'll immediately bring to my deities. And it's just something I do all the time. It took me a really long time to realize that other people don't do that. Or maybe other people are just operating from a totally different perspective. And the people that I look up to, or the people that I expect to, treat me in the way that I want to be treated, in the way I treat other people, through working with the death deities, through this wisdom that I've gained from them, and just by kind of aging and realizing these things myself and getting older and being like, oh, my parents are just hurt children deep down, right? Realizing that has been really helpful in my relationships with other people. And it's been really helpful to me because I can create stronger boundaries. I can forgive myself and forgive others. I'm not necessarily saying that you should forgive everybody, but I think it's helpful, especially if you have ongoing relationships in your life that you can't break off or you don't want to break off, that are constantly challenging you or constantly bringing things up where you're just like, how could this person be acting this way, or whatever it is. I think it's really helpful to, look at it from the perspective of their past, their personality, separate themselves from you. And if you need to, separate whatever pedestal you've put them on, or whatever, even like subconscious authority that you've given them in your life in some way, or what title you've given them in your life, right? I think adjusting those roles in your head, adjusting how those roles are going to function, can be really helpful at navigating those dynamics with people. And this also goes for people that you look up to and really respect. Everybody you look up to and respect has had terrible, shitty things happen to them, has done terrible, shitty things, has reacted poorly to certain things. It really reminds me of like the idea of the fatal flaw, or the idea of hubris, that we see throughout Greek mythology. All of these heroes, all of these amazing people doing amazing things, maybe. We could argue that they are or they aren't, but for the purposes of this, all these amazing people doing amazing things, right? Or what the gods deem as amazing things, these feats of strength or whatever, they still have these fatal flaws. They still have hubris. And a lot of the time, the hubris is something that has happened like earlier in life, that has come through earlier in the myth, that keeps haunting the person. Sometimes it's something really innate, and the message is that like the person can't really control it. It has to do with what they're fated to do, or how they're fated to be. And that's been really helpful for me as well, to kind of release some pain associated with certain relationship dynamics in my life, mostly my mom, because I can just say to myself, like, maybe it was just my mom's fate to be that way, and I can't change that. I literally cannot change it. I can't go up to the gods and change it. There's nothing I can do in this life to change it. I can't heal her. I can't save her. None of that is possible. So I'm just going to adjust the way that I view her and experience her, and adjust my expectations, right? So the last thing that I'm going to talk about today, that the death gods have taught me, is this idea, a message that was given to people. This was the advice. And I obviously really disagree with it. Here's my Hades altar down here. It's right down there. I have another altar right over here to another death deity. I love my death gods. I'm doing just fine. I don't know about you, but I'm having a great time living in my little Chthonic temple, which is what I call this office, because it's just me and all my death deities, and we're all hanging out. And I don't know, like nothing bad has happened yet, knock on wood. But I don't believe that there is a problem with having death altars, or object like bones, or things that sort of like have the energy of death on them, allegedly. I don't think that there is anything wrong with having these things around, or working with these things, or bringing these things into your home. And it creates this larger issue around people seeing death as a problem that needs to be solved. What if death and death energy, and even the instance or the presence of death, what if that's not the problem? What if that's not a problem that we need to solve? What if that's something that we don't need to stay away from. Death is going to come for us all someday. And why are we trying to run both energetically and maybe mentally and emotionally from death, right? Why are we trying to run from it? The idea of memento mori, remembering death, making sure to recall and remember death, that whole idea, right? That comes from like the kind of ancient Romans and Stoicism and that sort of thing. It's talked about a lot in Stoicism. Memento mori, it's agreeing with this idea that death is not a bad thing. Death is not the problem. And it can actually maybe be therapeutic for you to consider or to meditate on, or to have objects in your home or have altars in your home to deities that represent death. Maybe doing death magic or working with graveyard dirt or working with bones isn't a negative, bad thing that's going to cause all these problems in your life. Maybe these are strategic things that we can do to actually live a more empowered, better quality of life. I also hear sometimes people being like, I hate going to graveyards, I never step foot in graveyards, or I hate, being around dead things or whatever it is, right? I'm talking kind of more specifically about people who see death or the energy or vibration of death as a negative thing that like needs to be cleansed and removed and as far as possible from their life. I think that we can all agree that like we're always kind of surrounded here on earth by death energy. Everything dies, the leaves die, the plants die, we die. I've said death so many times, I don't really know what the vibe is on YouTube. This is obviously going on like Spotify and other Apple Podcasts and other places, but I don't know what the vibe is on YouTube. Like, do they not want you to say that word a million times? I don't know what the rules are. But it's okay. I am talking about those people specifically who see it as this problem that needs to be solved, or that they need to put themselves as far away from it, or else they will bring that energy into their life. It's kind of the same idea as like people who didn't want to call upon Hades by his name because they worried that it would evoke him and death would come upon them. I understand it a little bit more from the ancient perspective because obviously, people in the ancient world, they did not have access to a lot of the resources that we have today. They probably died a lot more often from things that would not kill us in the modern age. And I can see this much larger fear potentially of death maybe coming from the ancient world. Death always is shrouded in fear. There's always this kind of primal fear as humans who are built for survival. Like that's what we are supposed to be doing. We're literally kind of built to survive. So there's always going to be some kind of like primal bodily reaction against death or to stay away from that. I do think that death gets a bad rep. Dead things that are somehow associated with the energy of death in some way, like graveyards or bones or death deities, they get associated with this sort of negative, low vibrational thing that you need to remove and put as far away from your life as you can, or else bad things are going to happen. And I think that equation, that thinking about death and dead things and death deities from that perspective, is the reason why you have so much fear, or the reason why there is a lot of fear around like things leaving or things ending, or, a variety of things. Trying to keep things as far away from you as possible that are making you uncomfortable is not a sustainable long-term strategy for anything. So I think the more that we can remember death, bring death into our waking daily lives, right? Or allow things like grief and removal of the energies that we no longer need to flow through us, to process through us, and allow ourselves to look at these things and address these things. I think that is a way more healthy perspective. And, death is not a problem that we need to solve, but that sounds like a way better, more successful long-term solution than trying to keep it away from you and being afraid that it's going to come into your life, or being worried that it's going to creep into your life in some way. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love talking about this stuff. It's like my favorite thing to talk about. I sometimes find myself talking a lot about like Hades deity work, over the kind of like lessons that Hades and the other deities that I work with have taught me. Sometimes I like just focus on the deity work perspective, or like teaching about Hades and his, mythology and working with him. And I kind of forget like to tell y'all what I've learned and how helpful the relationship has been over the last 10 or so years that I've worked with him. So I'm really happy I did this episode where I got to share a lot of that wisdom. It's not all of it, but it's just the kind of things that were coming through that I really wanted to share with you as well. As of today, my Patreon has been open for 2 whole weeks. Thank you so much to everybody who's joined. We've seriously had so many members join and hop in, and I can't wait to show them and show the slide at the end of the video podcast episode. Seriously, to everybody who has joined, thank you so much. I am still doing Patreon giveaways this entire month. So if you join in the month of October, you're going to be entered into a giveaway to win something. If you join the higher tiers, like the Coven tier, you will get 3 entries. The second tier, the Diary tier, will get 2 entries. And then the first tier, the Angel tier, will get 1 entry into my Patreon giveaway. And this lasts until November 3rd. So even the couple days after November, we're still running some giveaways because I wanted it to be like a full 30 days from when the official launch was on October 3rd. Thank you so much for listening and for watching, and we will talk very soon. Bye.